Welcome to our first in a series of educational and informational overviews on the topic of missing middle housing. This overview is intended to be a follow-up to the presentation that was given to the Silver Spring community on March 16th by Opticos Design, and to help frame the discussion around missing middle housing and what it means for the Silver Spring community as we go through our upcoming visioning workshops on April 13th and April 27th for the adjacent communities. This overview is not a set of recommendations for Silver Spring. It is simply an overview of what is missing middle housing from a national perspective, so that when we meet during the visioning sessions, we can all have a baseline for what we are talking about. This overview will cover the following topics. What is missing middle housing as defined and explained by the creators of the national movement and concept of missing middle housing, Opticos Design? What housing typologies are considered on the spectrum of missing middle housing? What is the history behind these housing typologies, as they are not new to the American housing scene? Understanding scale of development and what the term scale means when we talk about different types of housing development from an industry standard perspective. Where is missing middle housing ideally located for the best results when trying to integrate missing middle housing typologies from a broad perspective? We will provide a few house scale case studies that are local to the region to show visual examples. And finally, we have prepared a visual preference survey or comparisons of missing middle housing examples versus housing types that we are more commonly seeing develop in and around single-family neighborhoods to get everyone thinking and to start the conversation about what is more important or what is more appropriate or preferable from a scale standpoint in our neighborhoods today. What is missing middle housing? Let's start with the basic definition as defined by Opticos Design and missingmiddlehousing.com. Missing middle housing is house-scaled buildings, a range of smaller units in multi-unit or clustered housing types, ideally located in walkable communities, and meets the need for more housing choices at different price points. Why is it called missing middle? These types typically have been missing from current U.S. building stock and have typically been illegal to build since the mid-1940s due to the zoning changes that occurred after the Second World War. Middle because they sit in the middle of a spectrum between detached single-family homes and mid-rise apartment buildings in terms of form and scale, number of units, and oftentimes affordability. Here is a list of common themes or attributes of successfully implemented missing middle housing. Ideally, missing middle housing is located or placed in a walkable context to goods and services, transit, and amenities, as residents living in missing middle housing or smaller units typically has less need for a car, may not have a car, and parking requirements are ideally reduced or non-existent for these housing types. Small footprint buildings. Again, we are focused on house scale buildings in between a single family home and mid-rise multifamily buildings so that they fit into a single family neighborhood fabric. Simple construction, meaning wood frame conventional construction, which is typically less expensive to build and creates community. By providing more housing types, you are creating more options and different price points for individuals to choose from based on their lifestyle and available income, creating a more diverse, mixed income community that is attainable to more people. And because of this, they are more marketable to the public. This is the spectrum of where missing middle housing sits within housing typologies. These types highlighted in the yellow-orange are typical missing middle housing typologies and are house scale, meaning 1 to 3 stories in height. They range from a duplex on the far left end to 3-story live-work units on the far right end. The next 8 slides describe the basic missing middle housing typologies in more detail, with real-world examples shown in the images, some older and some newer, some more modern versions of these typologies, as well as more traditional typologies that you're used to seeing. Some are local and some are regional examples, and some are examples from other areas of the United States and Canada to give you an idea of what the types can look like in context. Where we can, we do try and show local examples, but not all types are appropriate everywhere. In this example, this is a duplex side by side. In this slide, we're showing a diagram of how that would work in 3 dimensions and how the parking works. Most of these examples, we're using front-loaded and access from the street examples because we do not have many alley situations in Silver Spring. We have the typical unit size, and these are a national average, and they typically range from 600 to 2,400 square feet. We have a few local examples here in Silver Spring as well as in Washington, D.C., which are older. And we've also shown a more modern example of a duplex located in Denver, Colorado. There's also the duplex stack type, and this is essentially a duplex that has 2 units stacked on top of each other. The typical unit size in square feet is 600 to 2,400 square feet. And again, we're showing diagrams to show that these parking situations are front-loaded and accessed from the street, which would be more common here in Silver Spring. Then there is the triplex, which is 3 units stacked on top of each other. These are a little larger in terms of missing middle housing, but they are still house scale in that they are typically 1 to 3 stories. The typical unit square footage ranges from 700 to 1,600 square feet. And again, the parking is typically front-loaded and accessed from the street. We have a local example shown on your right from King Farm in Rockville, Maryland, as well as some newer examples on the bottom shown from Montreal, Canada. We are showing a fourplex here in this slide. We have some more traditional examples shown here in the images. The typical unit sizes range from 500 to 1,200 square feet. So because we have more units in a house scaled building on a house scaled lot, the unit sizes are smaller. And again, we're showing the example in the 3-dimensional diagram of how the parking would be front loaded and accessed from the street. Then we have the sixplex. We do have some sixplex examples here locally, as shown in the images in Tacoma Park, DC, as well as Tacoma Park, Maryland. The typical unit size for a sixplex is 500 to 1,200 square feet nationally. And again, the 3D diagram shows a front-loaded access from the street parking situation and how that could work. There's also a more modern example of a recently built sixplex in Washington, DC, in the image to your right. There are also multiplexes, which are typically over 6 units. In the case on the bottom, the image from Tacoma Park, Washington, D.C., which is called Phase Flats. This is a recent house scale development of 8 units on a single family lot at a house scale in terms of size and height. It ranges at about 2.5 stories tall. And the other examples are from out west, and these are a little larger examples, and some with also have shared courts or public spaces. The typical unit sizes here can range from 500 to 1,200 square feet. And again, in the diagram, the 3D diagram, we want to show a front-loaded access from the street as it relates to our situation that is more common in Silver Spring neighborhoods. There's also a courtyard cottage or cottage courts typology, and there's also courtyard typologies. These typically take up more than one lot and are assembled around a common public amenity space or green space. The typical unit sizes can range from 500 to 800 square feet. They're usually on the very small side. And again, parking can be off to one side or front-loaded and accessed from the street. We do have a regional example here in the image on the top right from Falls Church, Virginia, and these are called the railroad cottages. And the most common type that we see here in Montgomery County is the townhome. Typical unit sizes range nationally from 1,000 to 3,000 square feet. And again, a lot of these are accessed from the street and then rear loaded. We do have some local examples here from Silver Spring in the images, Falls Grove, Maryland, Richmond, Virginia, as well as the Ellen Wilson homes in Washington, D.C. And these that we're showing here range in 2-story to 2.5-story in height. The missing middle housing types we just illustrated on the previous slides are not new inventions, as mentioned in the presentation by Opticos Design on March 16th. These house scale typologies are not new and have been around since the 1900s. In the early to mid 1900s, Sears and Roebuck, for example, sold house plans and later house kits to the American market, and some of these houses were missing middle housing types, such as the fourplex. The next two slides define what we mean when we talk about different scales of development from an industry standard perspective, whether it's the real estate industry, the architecture profession, or the construction industry. These slides are meant to be informative to help everyone understand what attributes are attributed to different scales of development. So on the far left, we see missing middle housing or house scale at a maximum height in our situation in our 60 zones, which would be 35 feet, but are typically 1 to 2.5 stories in height. And that is also equal to what we call low rise in the industry standard of 1 to 3 stories wood frame construction or stick built. And so you can see house scale and low rise is the common wood frame construction that we're talking about here. There is also mid-rise and high-rise construction, as you see on the far right. Scales of development by construction type work a little differently in the building code. They range from type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, and type 5. And what we're really trying to show here is that missing middle housing is simply constructed. It's wood frame type 5 to achieve good densities without the added financing challenges and risk of more complex construction types. It is the most least expensive form of construction. Missing middle housing types typically have a footprint not larger than a large detached single-family home, making it easy to integrate them into existing neighborhoods and serve as a way for the neighborhood to transition to higher density and Main Street context. There are a number of ways in which this can be accomplished, which we will explain through the following slides. In this example, missing middle housing types are spread throughout the block, sitting side by side next to detached single-family homes. These are shown in the yellow and orange color for missing middle housing types, and the single-family detached types are shown in the more gray color. This blended pattern of detached single-family homes and missing middle housing types works well because the forms of these types are never larger than a large house. This configuration is usually located on the end grain of several continuous blocks adjacent to a neighborhood main street. As an example, you could think of Fenton Village and Fenton Street. This increases the blended density necessary to support small locally serving commercial and service amenities and transit. This configuration allows for the use of slightly larger buildings such as fourplexes because the missing middle housing types are not sitting next to detached single-family homes. Missing middle housing can create an effective transition from a neighborhood to a main street or downtown commercial and mixed-use area, such as Colesville Road or Georgia Avenue. These types are generally more tolerant and better able to effectively mitigate any potential conflicts related to the proximity to commercial and retail buildings or parking lots behind commercial buildings, as shown here. Smaller scale missing middle housing types are placed on a few of the lots that transition from the side street to the primary street, providing a transition in scale to the larger buildings on the end grain of the block along the primary street. This could be an example along Colesville Road. The idea is if missing middle housing is done well and placed with the appropriate typologies in the appropriate locations for the context, missing middle housing should blend in seamlessly, as shown in the image on the right. One of the most common forms of missing middle housing we see produced in Montgomery County over the decades and is most prevalent today is the townhome. But many of the townhomes and townhome development being built today are not house scale in terms of height and unit size, and in most cases are not more affordable. Over the past several decades, we have seen the evolution of the townhome here in Montgomery County and across the country. Townhomes have grown in size and cost when family sizes with kids have been decreasing over the decades. Many of the newer townhome development we see today are more than 3 stories in height and over 1,500 square feet in unit size, and therefore the cost to afford that townhome has also grown and gone up. In the slide you see here, all of the examples that we used are from Montgomery County. So you see the size, how the size has increased from the 70s till now, from smaller 2 to 2.5 story, 800 to 1,100 square foot unit sizes to now sometimes upwards of 3,000 square feet and 4 stories in height, less of a house scale. The following slides visually illustrate a few local and regional examples of what can be considered missing middle housing within the spectrum between a single-family detached home and mid-rise apartment buildings. Some we might consider on the smaller scale and some on the larger scale of missing middle types. One of the most proximate examples to the Silver Spring downtown and adjacent communities plan area is the development along Georgia Avenue just north of Spring Street off Noyce Drive. This development of 2.5-story townhomes and duplexes is integrated with an established single-family detached home neighborhood. 2 single-family homes were preserved and integrated within this development of missing middle housing types. These local and newer examples are what could be classified as medium-scale missing middle housing types. 3-story stacked triplexes, and the multiplex on the right is the scale of a large mansion or larger missing middle housing. These are located in King Farm in Rockville, Maryland. Kentlands has a variety of examples of 2.5 to 3-story townhomes, accessory dwelling units, and examples of live-work units of retail along a main street, such as we might envision somewhere in Fenton Village as an example, all in the middle of the spectrum between single-family detached homes and mid-rise apartment types. The Ellen Wilson Homes in Washington, D.C. was a Hope 6 grant in 1993 located in the Capitol Hill area of Washington, D.C. This is an example of various types of townhome units that were built and replaced when they replaced a public housing neighborhood in downtown D.C. These range in 2 to 2.5 story heights. These are railroad cottages located in Falls Church, Virginia. As you can see on the image on the right, the aerial, it's a set of 10 homes centered around a common amenity walkway or green space, public amenity space, and the parking is located to one end of the development. This is a local example of cottage court example. The following slides are a visual preference survey used to look at side-by-side comparisons to understand what approach may be more appropriate or a better fit within a certain context based on individual preferences. Here we are looking at form and scale, not architectural style. In the following slides, we will look at some missing middle housing strategies as a possible solution versus what has been more commonly built in its place recently. But first, let's discuss the meaning of density. It's important that we understand that there's a difference between density and building size and building height. Density does not equate to building size or building height, as you can see in the example illustrated. There are very different housing typologies. These are very different housing typologies with roughly the same density, but very different in scale, form, and size, with a very different presence on the street. Missing middle housing types should be focused on scale and form of the development and not on density alone. Here in this comparison, we are not talking about architectural style. We are simply looking at the form and scale or size of the house types and what may be more appropriate within a single-family neighborhood from not only a form and scale standpoint, but a price standpoint and marketability. We have heard from communities that there is concern around the increase in teardowns of smaller, older homes and replacing them with larger mansion-sized homes that fill the entire lot and reduce the tree canopy of the neighborhoods in order to build it. This also increases the cost of these homes and makes them less available to people of other incomes. On the right, you see a more missing middle housing duplex scale that is 2 units versus the tear down or rebuild of 1 unit on the left. Which do you think is more appropriate? This example in Tacoma Park, DC, these two buildings are a couple lots away from each other. One is the Phase Flats in Tacoma Park, DC, which is 8 units and is a more recent example of a missing middle house scale form in multi-form unit. It's 2.5 stories and on a single family lot. Just down the street from Phase Flats is an apartment building. It's 3 stories and a lot larger in scale, not house scale, and is about the same number of units per acre. In this example, we have a set of 4-story townhomes that are a bit out of scale with a typical 1 to 2.5 story single family neighborhood versus a more modest size or house scale missing middle townhouse type. As food for thought, we leave you with a few questions to think about as we prepare to work with you during the visioning sessions. Again, this is meant to be educational and informational. This overview is intended to be a follow-up to the presentation that was given to the Silver Spring community on March 16th by Opticos Design, and to help frame the discussion around missing middle housing and what it means for the Silver Spring community as we go through the upcoming visioning sessions on April 13th and April 27th. This overview is not a set of recommendations for Silver Spring. As food for thought, do you think house scale multi-unit living options as shown in this overview could fit in Silver Spring or in your neighborhood? Why or why not? What opportunities and challenges are presented by adding missing middle housing types? We will, as we go through the visioning sessions, we will start to look at and study all of the elements that impact missing middle housing, such as parking, such as zoning, such as tree canopy, and all the other elements. That concludes the missing middle housing overview. We hope that the information presented is helpful in understanding what missing middle housing is, and we look forward to discussing your thoughts, ideas, and concerns during the upcoming visioning workshops. Again, this presentation is not making any future recommendations for the plan at this point. It is only provided as information so that we are all on the same page regarding what missing middle housing is at the broader level as expressed by the experts. If you have any comments, questions, or ideas you would like to share with the team regarding this overview, please feel free to email us or provide a comment in the comment box on the project website. Along with our visioning workshops, we are continuing to collect thoughts and feedback from the community through our online interactive map, the React map, and via email. We now have 2 visioning workshops for the adjacent communities, and though both are full, we are working on increasing the number of participants. So please encourage everyone interested to sign up through the waitlist on our website. We need to know how many people are on the waitlist so we can know how many people we're letting in, and we will do our best to try to accommodate everyone. So please sign up for our Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities e-letter to stay involved. Please share feedback through our online interactive map via the link here. And if you have any questions, please contact or email our planners. Thank you very much.